The Hazari Reapers scorched Earth's atmosphere, blotting out the blue skies, as Emperor Altair broadcasted his final ultimatum on every screen: kneel or burn. For millennia, the Hazari's oppressive grip had choked the life from countless worlds across the galaxy. Earth was to be the next acquisition of their ever-expanding empire. But one human, an ex-soldier named George Morris, had intercepted their invasion plans. He stood before the hastily convened Earth Council, the air thick with fear and desperation. "Our defenses are no match for their firepower," George stated, his voice steady. "Surrender means the end of our freedom, our very humanity." Murmurs of dissent rippled through the room. To fight was suicide. The Hazari's technology outclassed Earth's in every way. Capitulation seemed the only path to survival. George slammed his fist on the podium, silencing the whispers. "The Hazari will not be content to lord over us. They will work us to death in their minds, experiment on our children, crush our spirit until we are nothing but hollowed-out shells, living only to serve our masters." He paused, letting the grim reality settle over the council like a suffocating blanket. "I have a plan. A preemptive strike against their homeworld and military strongholds. We hit them fast and hard with everything we've got. It's the only way." Objections rang out immediately. "That's insanity. You'll bring their full wrath down on us. We can't win this fight." George looked at each council member in turn. "If we kneel, we lose everything. Our only chance is to show them and the whole damn galaxy that humans would rather die on our feet than live under their boot. This is not about winning. This is about sending a message that we will not go quietly into the night." As silence engulfed the chamber, the weight of their choice hung heavy in the air. To surrender was to forsake all they held dear, but to resist could mean the annihilation of their species. George felt the burden of potentially condemning humanity to extinction. But in his heart, he knew they had to try, for if they failed, Earth would be forever shackled, and if by some miracle they succeeded, the fury of a wounded Hazari Empire would rain down upon them with the force of 1,000 suns. The fate of Earth and the future of all free beings now rested on the shoulders of the humans who dared to defy an intergalactic tyrant. In the days following the Earth Council's decision, George Morris threw himself into preparations with a fervor bordering on obsession. Sleep became a luxury he couldn't afford as he pored over every scrap of intel on Hazari technology and tactics. He handpicked a team of the best soldiers, pilots, and infiltration specialists Earth had to offer. Men and women who had proven themselves time and again in the face of impossible odds. The training was grueling, pushing even these elite operatives to their limits. They drilled relentlessly on captured Hazari weapons and equipment, learning every strength and weakness. George schooled them in Hazari language, customs, and protocols until they could pass as Imperial soldiers. Failure was not an option. As the team honed their skills, George outlined his audacious plan. A small strike force led by his old friend Captain Nate Reeves would infiltrate the Hazari homeworld and neutralize the command center. Simultaneously, Earth's main fleet would engage the Hazari Armada, drawing their attention away from the covert operation. It was a desperate gamble, but if successful, it would cripple the Hazari's ability to coordinate their forces. The Terran fleet drilled around the clock, practicing maneuvers and formations to maximize their effectiveness against the superior Hazari ships. Engineers worked feverishly to retrofit Earth's vessels with every technological edge they could muster. The entire planet united in a frantic bid for survival. But the Hazari would not sit idle. Emperor Altair, enraged by Earth's continued defiance, ordered a stranglehold on the solar system. Hazari warships blockaded key jump points, cutting off vital supply lines. Then the bombardment began. Human colonies and outposts burned under the onslaught of Hazari weapons. Millions perished in the opening salvos as Altair sought to cow Earth into submission through sheer, brutal force. Grim-faced refugees flooded Earth's spaceports, bringing tales of Hazari atrocities that steeled humanity's determination. With the noose tightening around Earth, George knew they had to act fast. Though the strike team was not yet ready by any sane military standard, Time had become a luxury Earth didn't have. With a heavy heart, George gave the order to commence Operation Backbreaker. As Earth's fleet mustered near Jupiter, the strike force boarded a captured Hazari shuttle and made the jump to Imperial space. Equipped with purloined IFF codes and cloaking devices, they slipped through the Hazari sensor net and made planetfall on the heavily guarded homeworld. Captain Nate Reeves and his team moved like ghosts through the labyrinthine streets of the Hazari capital, evading patrols and checkpoints with their hard-won knowledge of Hazari protocols. The command center loomed ahead, a monolith of black metal dripping with defenses. Infiltrating the command center proved harder than Nate had dared fear, and casualties mounted as they fought their way inside meter by blood-soaked meter. Each fallen comrade was a twist of the knife in Nate's heart, but they couldn't stop. Not now, with the fate of Earth hanging in the balance. As the surviving commandos planted explosive charges at key structural points, Nate found himself face-to-face with none other than Altair himself. The Emperor's elite guard fell upon the humans, and the command center became a brutal, close-quarters melee. Nate battled through to Altair, and the two leaders clashed in a storm of blades and fury. Cuts and blows were traded in a whirlwind of violence, until at last, Nate landed a kick that sent Altair's sword skittering across the floor. Left with no choice, Nate leveled his rifle at the Emperor's head. But Altair only smiled, a wicked, vicious thing, as he held up a small device. "If I die," he hissed, "this world dies with me." Nate hesitated, finger hovering over the trigger. If Altair was bluffing, they would lose their only chance. But if he was telling the truth... Miles above, George watched the scene unfold on the video feed from Nate's helmet cam, his heart in his throat. He had analyzed everything they knew of Hazari tactics and psychology, and in that moment, he made a judgment call. "Stand down, Nate," George ordered over the comm. "We can't take that risk. Not with an entire planet at stake." Nate ground his teeth but held his fire. The choice was taken out of their hands a moment later when alarms blared across every console in the command center. A new Hazari fleet had just dropped out of hyperspace near Earth, a massive force that had outflanked humanity's defenses. Altair forgotten, Nate rushed to the screens and watched in horror as the Hazari began bombarding Earth's surface, targeting major population centers. Millions were dying before his eyes. "Altair's flagship is hailing the fleet," one of the commandos reported, her voice shaking. "They're demanding our surrender." Nate looked to the Emperor, still standing there with his finger on the dead man's switch and a smug smile on his face. In that moment, he understood with cold certainty that if Altair left this room alive, he would order the complete annihilation of the human race. "George," Nate said into his comm, "we're out of options. It's now or never." There was a long pause, the weight of two worlds hanging in the balance. Then, George's voice came back, thick with grief. "Do it." The sharp crack of Nate's rifle was lost in the cacophony of explosions as the charges detonated throughout the command center. In those last seconds, as the world collapsed around them, neither he nor his team felt any pain or fear, only a sad, fierce pride that their sacrifice might give humanity a fighting chance. On the Hazari homeworld's surface, a new sun bloomed as the Doomsday device activated, a searing light that scoured all it touched. In an instant, Altair, the infiltration team, and billions of Hazari were vaporized as the planet began to tear itself apart. Across the galaxy, Hazari soldiers could only watch as their home shattered into a billion fragments, the beating heart of their empire reduced to drifting cosmic ash. Aboard their ships, confusion gave way to anguish, then to fury, and finally, to despair, as the realization sunk in that they were now a people without a world. At the Battle of Jupiter, Earth's fleet seized the sudden disarray among the Hazari ranks. Grief fueled the humans' guns as much as any power cell as they hurled themselves at the invaders with reckless abandon, buying time for the remnants of humanity to regroup and fortify their defenses. In the days that followed, as the Terran fleet consolidated their tenuous hold on the solar system, George and the survivors took stock of what had been lost and what had been won. Earth still stood, but billions had perished in the onslaught. The Hazari Empire had been dealt a crippling blow, but not a killing one. Like a wounded beast, the surviving Hazari would be thirsting for vengeance, and Earth had to be ready. For now, though, there was only the grief of the fallen to be borne, those who had made the ultimate sacrifice so that others might live. The scars left by this war would linger for generations, and every human who had seen those terrible days would carry the weight of their sins and their triumphs in equal measure. Earth and its people had walked through the fire and emerged tempered like steel on the other side. The path ahead would be nearly impossible, but they would walk it with the memory of the fallen to light their way. Whatever the future held, the Terrans would face it unbowed and unbroken. The destruction of the Hazari homeworld left humanity with a brief respite, but George Morris knew it wouldn't last. In the war room deep beneath Earth's surface, he stared at the holographic displays showing the status of human forces across the galaxy. The losses were staggering. "We dealt them a blow, but now we've poked the hornet's nest," Admiral Chen said, her face grim. George nodded. "They'll come at us with everything they've got. We need to strike first." Intelligence reports flooded in, detailing the chaos spreading through Hazari space. George watched footage of riots on Hazari worlds, soldiers turning on each other as word of Altair's death spread. Then came news that chilled him to the bone. Supreme Commander Arkoth had seized control, rallying the fractured empire with calls for vengeance. "This changes everything," George said. "Arkoth's a brilliant tactician. He won't rest until Earth is dust." Days turned to weeks as George and Earth's leaders formulated their strategy. They couldn't match Hazari numbers, but they could hit them where it hurt. Captain Nate Reeves stood before George, looking haggard but determined. "My team's ready, sir. Just give the word." George clasped his shoulder. "I know the risks, Nate, but if this works, we might just have a chance." Nate's strike team deployed, slipping past Hazari patrols in a stolen freighter. Their first target, a massive shipyard orbiting a gas giant. Creeping through maintenance tunnels, Nate's team planted their virus. Alarms blared as Hazari systems went haywire. Nate watched from their hidden vantage point as newly constructed warships careened into each other, their navigation systems fried. "Time to go," Nate said, leading his team back to their ship as chaos erupted around them. But they weren't done. Their next target was a Hazari supply depot. Under cover of darkness, they slipped past guards and placed charges on fuel tanks and munition stockpiles. The resulting explosion lit up the night sky. Nate allowed himself a grim smile as he watched the flames consume vital Hazari war materiel. With each successful raid, Nate's team grew bolder. They made contact with Hazari dissidents, building a network of informants and saboteurs. Meanwhile, George oversaw the transformation of human space. Asteroid belts became fortresses, colonies hardened their defenses. The shipyards of Mars and Titan churned out vessels day and night. But it wasn't enough. George knew that for all their successes, they were just delaying the inevitable. He watched the long-range sensors, tracking the massive Hazari fleet Arkoth was assembling. "We need something bigger," George muttered, staring at the tactical displays. "Something they'll never see coming." As reports of Nate's latest successful raid came in, George felt a glimmer of hope. They'd bloodied the Hazari nose, but now it was time to go for the throat. He began formulating a plan that would either save humanity or doom them all. George Morris stood before the holographic display, his eyes locked on the swirling mass of data points representing the Dravek system. The intelligence from Nate's missions had been a goldmine, revealing the critical weak point in the Hazari war machine. "This is it," George said, addressing the grim-faced military leaders gathered around him. "We hit Dravek. We cut off their supply lines. No fuel, no raw materials, no spare parts. Their whole war effort grinds to a halt." Admiral Ren Harper, a battle-scarred veteran with a reputation for impossible victories, leaned in to study the display. "It's a fortress, George. Orbital defenses, a full garrison. We'd be flying into the mouth of hell." George nodded. That's why they won't expect us to try. We go in hard and fast, overwhelm them before they know what hit them. For days, the hangars and shipyards of Earth buzzed with frantic activity. Every space-worthy vessel was pressed into service, from sleek warships to converted freighters filled with hastily mounted weapons. As the fleet assembled in high orbit, George addressed the crews. This is our chance to turn the tide, to show the Hazari that humanity won't go quietly into the night. Today, we fight not just for Earth, but for every world caught in the crossfire of this war. The journey to Dravik was tense, the fleet creeping through Hazari space using captured stealth tech. When they finally dropped out of FTL on the system's edge, George gave the order. All ships, commence attack. The human armada surged forward, catching the Hazari defense grid completely off guard. Laser fire lanced out, punching holes in the orbital platforms as fighters swarmed from carriers. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Harper barked orders. Beta Squadron, take out those defense satellites. Gamma Wing, clear a path for the landing craft. Ships traded fire in the void, explosions blossoming silently as the battle raged. A Hazari cruiser erupted into a fireball, debris peppering nearby vessels. On the planet's surface, alarms blared as the Hazari garrison scrambled to respond. Captain Nate Reeves and his team touched down amid the chaos, their dropship weaving through anti-aircraft fire. Move, 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 Nate shouted as they disembarked, sprinting for cover. We've got to secure that command center. They fought their way through the streets, plasma bolts sizzling past as Hazari defenders poured fire from fortified positions. Nate's team used every trick they'd learned, leapfrogging from cover to cover, laying down suppressing fire. Inside the orbital command center, the Hazari garrison commander snarled orders. Initiate the self-destruct sequence. We will not let these vermin take Dravik. A countdown appeared on every screen, ticking away the moments until the entire system would be reduced to atoms. Nate's team breached the command center, fighting room to room. We've got to shut it down, Nate yelled over the din of battle. Find the main computer core. They raced against time, disarming force fields and fighting through waves of defenders. With seconds to spare, Nate's tech expert got to work, fingers flying over alien controls. Got it, she shouted as the countdown froze, then vanished. But their victory was short-lived. Outside, the sounds of battle intensified as the remaining Hazari forces mounted a furious counterattack. In orbit, Admiral Harper's fleet engaged a newly arrived Hazari armada. All ships, evasive maneuvers, Harper ordered. Hit-and-run tactics, don't let them pin us down. Human vessels darted and weaved, striking at weak points before falling back. Casualties mounted on both sides as the space around Dravik became a graveyard of broken ships. George Morris coordinated it all from the flagship's war room, issuing rapid-fire orders as the situation evolved. We have to hold Dravik, he told his officers. Whatever it takes. This is our chance to break the Hazaris back. The battle raged on, humanity fighting tooth and nail for their foothold in the Dravik system. Victory hung in the balance, with the fate of Earth and countless other worlds riding on the outcome. The battle for Dravik raged on, human ships darting through the chaos of orbital combat. Admiral Harper's voice crackled over the comms. All units, press the advantage. We can't let up now. Explosions lit up the void as human vessels hammered Hazari defenses. A Terran cruiser erupted in flames, torn apart by enemy fire. Harper watched the casualty reports scroll across his display, each lost ship a knife in his gut. On the planet's surface, Nate and his team fought block by block through the Hazari command center. Plasma bolts sizzled past, scorching the walls. 2 of Nate's operatives fell, their bodies crumpling to the floor. Keep moving, Nate shouted, leading the survivors deeper into the complex. They rounded a corner, coming face to face with a squad of Hazari troops. Both sides opened fire simultaneously, the air filling with deadly energy. Nate dove behind a console, feeling the heat of near misses. He popped up, squeezing off shots that dropped 2 Hazari. His remaining team members dispatched the rest. This way, Nate called, consulting the schematic on his wrist computer. They sprinted down a corridor, alarms blaring around them. In orbit, Harper's flagship shuddered as it took a direct hit. "Shields at 40%, an officer reported. Harper gripped his chair, watching the tactical display. Human ships were falling, but so were the Hazari. It was a war of attrition now. "Sir," another officer called out, "we've breached their defense grid. Ground teams are landing." Harper allowed himself a grim smile. "Push through. We take Dravik today." The tide turned. Human forces swarmed the planet, overwhelming the disorganized Hazari defenders. In the command center, Nate's team reached their objective, the central computer core. "Plant the charges," Nate ordered, keeping watch as his demolitions expert worked. Suddenly, a barrage of fire erupted from a side passage. Nate felt white-hot pain lance through his chest as he returned fire. The last Hazari fell, but Nate slumped against the wall, blood seeping through his armor. He looked at the charges, then at his remaining teammates. "Finish it," he gasped. With trembling hands, they armed the explosives. Supporting Nate between them, they began their retreat. But Nate knew he was slowing them down. "Go," he said, sliding to the floor. "Complete the mission." His team hesitated, torn between duty and loyalty. Nate fixed them with an unwavering focus. "That's an order. Earth is counting on us." With heavy hearts, they left him behind. Nate clutched his rifle, guarding their escape. The charges detonated, the complex shaking around him. As the ceiling began to collapse, Nate closed his eyes, knowing his sacrifice had helped secure victory. In the aftermath, George Morris stood before the assembled human leaders. The room was somber, the cost of their triumph weighing heavily on all present. "We've won Dravik," George said, his voice raw with emotion. "But the price has been steep." He activated a holographic display, showing the extent of their losses. Ships destroyed, crews lost, entire units wiped out, but it also showed the crippling blow dealt to the Hazari war machine. "We can't stop now," George continued. "We have to press our advantage, take the fight to their core worlds. It's the only way to end this war." Murmurs of dissent rippled through the room. Admiral Chen spoke up. "George, our forces are decimated. We need time to regroup, to rebuild." George shook his head. "Time is the one thing we don't have. The Hazari are reeling, but they'll recover. We strike now, hard and fast, or we risk losing everything we've gained." He outlined his plan, a full-scale invasion of Hazari space, targeting their key production and command facilities. It was audacious, perhaps even reckless. The room erupted in heated debate. George let it wash over him, knowing the weight of the decision that lay before them. Finally, Admiral Harper stood. "I've seen what our people can do," he said, silencing the room. "Against impossible odds, they've achieved the impossible. If we're ever going to end this war, it's now." One by one, the other leaders nodded their agreement. The die was cast. Humanity would gamble everything on one final, desperate push. As the meeting adjourned, George approached Harper. "Ready the fleet, Admiral. We launch in 48 hours. Harper saluted, his face grim but resolute. "We'll make the Hazari rue the day they ever heard of Earth." Across human space, the call went out. Every ship, every soldier, every resource was mobilized. This would be the final battle, one way or another. In shipyards and loading bays, on planets and space stations, humanity prepared for the greatest offensive in its history. The fate of Earth, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.